Whenever we go to a web page, we are requesting data from that web page. This is called a request. Django treats it as the name request. So we can also see when we request a web page, by literally reloading a page, we see how many times we reloaded it and what's going on, right? So it's doing a type of request and to a specific URL, right? And if we back up to the home page, we see that it's requesting that page then, right? And then we refresh and so on. So what's actually happening here is that request goes into the URLs, right? So the user is looking for a specific URL. That URL is then sent to Django. Django then parses that URL and looks in these patterns for any matching patterns. And if there is one, it's going to then send that request to the view that handles it, right? And then from that view, we can return some sort of response. Or no response at all, but most likely you will return a response. So it kind of looks like this, right? We got a request, goes into Django, and then Django sends back a response. Right? So Django's the server in this equation. Now our requests actually have things attached to them. So if I actually print out request.method, and I'll just go ahead and say Django says, and then we can also print out the request.path. I can also print out request.user. Right, so the request has a bunch of things attached to it by default from Django. So we look at this, I refresh in here several times, and what I see is Django says this stuff, right? So it's a GET request, that's the method type, and then we've got the path, and then the actual user. Now, why is it that I'm telling you about this? Well, when you typically go to grab data, you're typically doing a GET request. A GET request means that you're getting data. You're grabbing whatever that data is, and that's often in the form of grabbing it from your database as well, right? So there's no coincidence that grabbing one single object was blog post.objects.get. That is somewhat correlated here, right? So it's still getting whatever that object is. So there's a concept in web development altogether called CRUD. So what CRUD is it takes this same concept of GET, but expands it to several other methods that are in your standard web applications anyway. So we just talked about GET. That's one kind of method. That is to retrieve or even to list things. I'll get into the list stuff later. Then we have another method called post, and that is to create things. Now, let's go ahead and see a post method. If I go into the admin, into adding a blog post, and I'll say another blog post, and blog post another, or whatever, and then we hit save and continue, it says it was made. If we look in the terminal, we see a bunch of GET requests here for our static files. No surprise there. And if we scroll up a little bit, we also see a post request, right? So that happened when I actually submitted a form. So that's when it was actually created. Now I'm on this thing here. I can also update this form. I can hit save and continue, and it says it was changed successfully. I can look back in the terminal, and once again, it's a post method. So I can use that for update as well. And then what about when I want to delete something? So let's go ahead and just delete this item. I'll say, yes, I'm sure. I hit delete. And yet again, another post method. So I can use post for all of those as well. Now there actually are literal HTTP methods for update and delete too. And I'll talk about those just briefly later, but we now have the basis of a web application, and that's CRUD. So that stands for create, retrieve, update, and delete. So our admin has these CRUD views already. even though it might not have seen light yet, right? So when I come in here and I look at one object, this is retrieving that object. That's the same thing as this, or getting that object. And then I already just showed you the create and delete stuff. So what we need to do is make views for each aspect of CRUD. So define, and then I'm going to call this the blog post list view. And again, it's going to take in the request, and then it will return a response. I'm going to go ahead and paste out these for each level of CRUD. Okay, so we've got a list view, and then we have a retrieve view. Then we're going to have an update view, a create view, and a delete view. Okay, so I could put it in the order of CRUD just so you see. The list view is a version of the retrieve view. So it's going to have a specific method for that. But this is what we want to work towards. We want to actually have all of these different views to actually handle the data in that CRUD way. And this is common across all web applications. Now, I will say that sometimes these views can do all of these things. Sometimes they do only one of them. We're going to focus on just doing one of them, and we'll go by step. We have 5 different CRUD-like views. So the list view can list out objects, right? This could also be a search view. We're not going to do that, but the idea here is that we're going to list out some sort of objects, and we're going to return those objects as its specific URL. So naturally, our template name is going to be the blog post list.html. The context, well, it's going to have to be some sort of list. I'm going to use the convention of object list, and I'll leave it empty for now. Okay? Because I want this to actually return a list of items. And that's it. The next one is the create view. Right? So what do we want to do here? Let's go ahead and use very similar syntax. This time we'll just say create.html. This one I actually want to be able to create objects. But how? Well, we would use a form. So we don't have forms yet, and we don't know how to use forms yet. So we're not going to do that just yet. But the context variable itself would be the form. Like, we'll want to have some sort of form in here. And that's going to be an object. So I'll just leave it as a string or an empty string for now. Or you could even say none. Okay. The next is the blog post retrieve view. Well, very similar to the create view. Of course, the template name is different. Post retrieve. And this is going to be one object. Or the detail view. That's actually a better term for it. And it's actually why we were calling the blog post detail page. Detail view is often what you would call a retrieve view. Because again, the list view and the detail view are both retrieving data in the sense of CRUD. But one is for one single object, the other one is for several objects. So we're going to call this the post detail view. Now, we already have how to do this. We already did it. So I can just adjust things slightly here and bring it into that view as well. Okay, so that's already done. Great. The next is the update and delete view. So update and delete will have to grab that original object. So they're actually based off of that original object for both of them, right? So I want to update an object. I want to change something in it. And then I also might want to delete something in it. Okay. So what happens in the update view is similar to the create view, except we actually pass an object. So yet again, I'm going to add a form in here as some of my context. All right. So of course, I don't actually know what all of these things are going to do exactly yet, or we don't. But I do know that I now have a structure to work towards. And this is true across all kinds of apps in web application in general, it's also true about in Django, right? So in Django itself, we are going to be working through these views to ensure that our blog is working in the way that we want it to. Now, you don't have to do all this because so much of CRUD is handled by the admin itself right now, which is a good way to actually check against what we're doing. In other words, to check against our views and how they are handling this data. That's also pretty cool. Now that we understand where we want to go, it's time to talk about more advanced querying of the database with Django. In other words, it's time to look at our models on another scale. The first thing that we would need to do in our blog post list is actually send in a query set of some kind, which QS is often the variable that's attributed to this, and it's literally blogpost.objects.all. So .objects is a Django manager that allows me to call .all, so I can literally get all of the objects in the database, and I don't have to modify anything. I don't have to add anything to the admin or the models or anything like that. It's literally just this one call, and that will allow me to have some sort of query set come back that is really just a list of objects. So it's a list of Python objects that we can use dot notation to see what's inside of that query set. So that's a list view. That will literally list it all out. Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and finish off this list view. Let's actually look at it with a template. So I'm going to go in my templates and I'm going to make a new folder in here. Or actually, I'm going to go to my templates. I'm going to make a new file in here. And I called it blog post list.html. Okay, blog post list. And just like our detail one, I can copy all this and paste it in here. But this time it's coming back with a list instead of, the actual objects. So we would iterate through. So for object in object list, and then we would display all of that. Now, of course, in a list view, you probably don't want to have it look like a detail view, right? So this is actually rendering out all of the details currently. So instead, what I'm going to do is just put it into a list element and use the object.title, and that's it. Okay, so now that we have a list and the view associated to it, I'm going to go ahead and copy this and import it into my URLs. So from these views, I'm going to import it in, and now I can bring back that original blog path and put that as my view, which I think makes the most sense, right? So if somebody got rid of the slug or the detail lookup URL, it would go to the list. Let's go ahead and check it out. Get rid of that. And what do you know? It's a list of all of my blog posts. Now, I will say, this is getting a little bit more advanced, but I will say that you can filter this down. You can use that .filter notation to have it be based off of something like title I contains, let's say hello. All right. So this would filter down to probably 1. So I refresh in here, and now it only shows me one object, right? So that's where the could be search comes in. But we'll leave it in as .all because that's more realistic to how we're building our list view. Now that we've finished our list view, let's go to our blog create view. This takes a form as context. So I can't really go into this just yet, but I will make my template at least. And I'm going to make it based off of the blog post detail. So I'll copy that and I'll go ahead and say blog post create.html. And we'll paste that in there. And we'll just say create new blog post. Save that. And we bring that view, so the blog post create view, we bring that into our URLs. And I'm going to import things in alphabetical order. And now what I can do is I can make another endpoint for blog create and we would say something like that. Now, the reason I actually am not going to go this method is because slugs and create end up causing potential issues. So what I'm going to do instead then is just do blog dash new. Right, so this is a completely different endpoint, so I'll go ahead and put it below. And there we go. Okay, so then now, to just verify that that's in there, we'll just go to blog dash new. And now we have that template actually rendering. Right? Okay. So, yeah, we definitely have to come back to that and do a lot of things there. We have our blog post detail view. If we go into our URLs, we're just going to change our blog post detail page to the detail view. They're really not any different, but now we have our actual blog items. Looked like I had a import error. I just want to make sure that the detail page is no longer there. Okay, so we go back to our blog and then something like hello world. All right, so it's still rendering. So that view is good. That also means that I can probably get rid of this. Okay. Next is the update view. Same thing as the create view. I'm going to just go ahead and copy this, make a new file, blog post update.html. In this case, it's not actually different than the detail view. We can leave it as the same. So I'll bring in that detail view stuff. And while I do that, I'm going to do the same thing for the blog post delete. Okay. The only difference is I'll just append something that's related to it, as in delete and update. And then finally, I'll go ahead and import those two views into my URLs, update view and delete view. Going back up here. Let's go ahead and just copy and paste a couple times, change these, update, and delete. So to me, the logical paths or URLs for that would be something like /edit and then /delete. Okay, so we update it and put the different views where they need to go. Okay, so we now have the views mounted and set up. We have the URLs routed correctly. It's time to do one more thing related to URLs before we jump into the forms. If you remember back to the settings when we went to the installed apps, I said each one of these apps should do one thing and one thing really, really well. Another idea is that they should be mostly pluggable. What I mean by that is grabbing this block of code here, the actual app, and dragging and dropping it into another project that needs that same kind of app. I don't want to repeat myself at all, but if I have to repeat myself, I want to do it as little as possible, and that's where the pluggable comes in. Right now, it is not pluggable, and it starts with the URLs. So the URLs right here are just simply not that great. They are repeating at least one thing right here. And you also might imagine if you had, let's say, 10 different apps, your URL page is going to start to get fairly bloated. So we already have an example of something that works really well that we can also emulate, and that's the admin URLs. Right, so the admin URLs doesn't have all of this bloat because the admin is pluggable and it has a URLs module inside of it. So we come into our blog and we make a new URLs module as just straight up URLs. And we can literally copy our main site URLs and bring them in here, paste them in. But of course, we only want the URLs and the comments that are related to the blog, right? So to the relative views. So I'm going to go ahead and do .views, import all those things, get rid of those other views. I also am only going to have the path in here. I'll get rid of the Django admin stuff because I don't need that. And then I'll just go one by one and get rid of the things that I don't want. which is anything not related to the blog. Cool. Now that I have this, what I want to think about is in my URLs, do I get rid of these things now? Well, of course, you don't need them anymore. Actually, the only one I'm going to leave is this create view. I'll get rid of all of the other CRUD related items, and I'll also get rid of the imports for them. Okay, but I still want my paths to be the same. And we actually already have an example inside of Django's docs as it is. So all you need to do now is actually import the include block here. And then again, setting a path. And this is going to be blog with a slash at the end. And this is going to include the blog.urls. So what this does is then looks into the blog app, into the URLs module, and it looks for the URL patterns like this. But notice how they all start with blog, or this right here starts with blog, and these all start with blog. I don't need those twice. I only need it one time, so I can actually get rid of all these. And I'll also get rid of the create one. Okay, so we save that. And we look back into our URLs here. And there we go. So we've got our blog here. And I can refresh. And it looks like things are still working. Right? So the path itself is coming here. And path is coming here. So if I actually kept, let's say for instance I kept blog on all of these. I'll just simulate it right now. Let the server restart. And now it's saying blog. Like I literally would have to have blog in it twice. Which is valid. It's just kind of weird. Like you can certainly do this. It just doesn't really make sense for what we're doing. So I'll go ahead and get rid of that. And that is a much more effective way to actually have our URLs come in. Now why is it that I have this create view separate from these URLs? Everything has to do with the slug itself, right? So if you actually had a slug for your blog and that slug was new or create or something that would actually reference this create view, you would have a hard time diagnosing where it's coming from because you wouldn't be able to see that view. What I mean by that is, let's go ahead and take a look at this by calling it hello world. And going into that blog post itself, refreshing in here, it says create a new blog post. It's not actually going to that hello world post. So the same would be true if we used create or new. It would go off of that view first and then every other view that comes after it, which again is why I'm doing blog-new right now. That way the actual lookup is going to where it needs to go. So this should inform you the last important part about these URLs is that it's reading them from top to bottom. So whatever it matches with first, that's what it's going to stop at and then render the related views for that. And in the case of the blog.urls or this include call, it will go through all of those URLs first and then it will come back and do all of these. It's pretty cool. There is certainly another element that we have to consider when it comes to making this more pluggable, and it has everything to do with our templates, or more specifically, our blog templates. So let's go ahead and go to our detail, and I'm just going to change the name of the detail real quick to something that doesn't exist. So blog _ post _ detail 2. We save that, we go to a detail view, refresh, you see this error. So if you look at what's going on here is it's trying to load the template by looking into the file system loader, into our templates directory. It's looking for post detail2.html. What it's also trying to do is it's trying to look into the app directories. So right now, the only templates directory in the app are related to the admin app and the auth app. Right? So in other words, it's looking for template directories in all of these apps, including our blog app. And all it found was template directories in here, and then it looked specifically for that file name, which of course doesn't actually exist here. So what that means is I can actually come into my app and make a new folder in here called templates. So this is the app directory level of templates. We have our file system or our custom templates right here, which are denoted by that file system loader. They're denoted right here. No surprise there. So if we actually add in a templates folder to our blog, we can put them in here. So let's go ahead and solve that problem, which I just called, I believe was blog post detail 2.html. We save that. And now if I refresh in here, let's restart our server here. And now I get an empty page, right? So this actual template here doesn't have anything. Okay. So I can easily move all those templates over. So let's go ahead and reveal all these in Finder. And I'm going to move them over to my blog app now. Okay, so here they are. Let's close them out inside of our project. And let's go ahead and grab all of them that are related to the blog post, and we'll bring them into that templates directory now. Okay, so they're all moved. And I'm going to rename this back to just being 1, and I'll delete that 2 here. So I'll go ahead and delete that file. Okay, great. Restart the server again because we now have moved all of those. And what do you know? It loads them up. And we go into the blog and we can check every single one if we need. Okay, so this is close. But we actually want to go one step further, and that is by creating a new folder in here with the same name of the app and put them all in there. In fact, we can also rename them in here as well to what they are. So create, delete, detail, list, and finally update. Okay, so now we've got these items in here. I'm going to change the template names for each one. And it's really simple. We just put a slash, just like that, for each level. And then we rerun our server again. Just close it out, rerun it. Go in here, and what do you know? It reloads, and it works just fine. So now, this app, I could send you this whole app, and it would be exactly the same. All you would have to do is put it into the settings right here, and then add in these 2 URLs. That's what a lot of third-party apps do, right? They don't actually put it into the file system folder here. But the nice thing about doing it this way is that if you did send me your pluggable app like this, and I wanted to make a custom change, I could just come into these templates and do blog and do something like detail.html and literally change it right here. So these templates will actually override what you have inside of any of your apps. So that's another cool feature of them. Of course, I'm not going to do that. I'll delete that folder. We don't need it. But now we have just a little bit cleaner of a way and a more pluggable way for our app itself prior to jumping in to doing the forms.